I'll let us go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm Sam. I am a co-survivor. My mom was a breast cancer survivor. Currently, I'm 20 years old, but when my mom was diagnosed, I was 8 years old. So this has been a long time since her diagnosis. But I'm also an intern with Forge, which is mainly because I am a co-survivor. It's given me a huge passion for breast cancer and just working with that community and trying to find ways to impact the breast cancer community and the healthcare community. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'll let Pam introduce herself.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for including me. My name is Pam Stanfield, and I'm a co-survivor and a pre-vivor. So I'll let you know what that is. I was actually 30 when my mother was diagnosed, and I was 9 months pregnant with twin daughters at the time. As a matter of fact, when my mother was in the hospital having her mastectomy, I was in the hospital having my girls. My mother was 56 when she was diagnosed and 58 when she passed away. And I am 58 now. And my brother kind of prepared me for that birthday, how it felt a little different. But I have a passion for supporting the caregivers and the daughters and the families of those breast cancer patients and advocating for them just through friendship and listening and directing them to where they might need to go. And I'm so glad I found Forge.
So one question for Pam for Pam and both just to answer real quick at the beginning was, just from our introductions, you can hear like both of us had mothers who were diagnosed. But at the same time of us being both co-survivors to moms diagnosed, we also have extremely different stories. Like Pam being about to be a mother when her mom was diagnosed and me being a child. Our age has had a tremendous impact on both of us as co-survivors. And so I think the first question I just wanted kind of both of us to talk about, and Pam, just like give me your experience of how kind of your age has impacted your experience as a co-survivor.
Absolutely. I, of course, as I said, my mother was diagnosed when I was, goodness, I think I was 9 months pregnant with the girls. And I didn't spend my life since then looking over my shoulder, waiting for this to happen to me, but it really was more of an empowering. I felt like I had the gift of kind of knowing and learning and going through that process with my mother. She was diagnosed at 56. She had her mastectomy. Then she recurred and had a bone marrow transplant. And, we kind of chased it from one end of her body to the other. But I look at, and I've said before, that my mother's cancer was the greatest gift I was ever given. And everything that happened in my life as a result of that diagnosis wouldn't have happened otherwise. My mother, I'm from South Florida. My mother lived with me for the last 6 months of her life. She got kisses from her granddaughters every day. And, I just feel so blessed to have had that opportunity. I think I was an advocate for my mother before there really was a name for that. Coincidentally, I have crossed paths with Janet and also, good morning, with Marion throughout that process with my mother. I did the breast cancer, the 60-day walk in 2000 in memory and support of my mother, and have been involved, really kind of the go-to for my friends. Also, I have had a prophylactic mastectomy as a result of being under surveillance for 4 years through Janet. So, it has shaped And, I feel like I've had the gift of being able to get ahead of things because of that.
Yeah. I think on the opposite, like, end of that, from my experience being like a child, I was only 8 years old, and kids at that age are still trying to figure out, what the world is, what words even mean. And so I can like remember second grade, I can remember us learning how a clock works. And so while most kids in my class were like going home and doing their little homework on learning how to read a clock, I was wanting to understand what the words that I was hearing at home meant. Like, what does chemo mean? What are drains? How do drains work? Like, that was what I, as an 8-year-old, was trying to understand and learn. And so I think age made a tremendous impact on my experience as a co-survivor, just because at that age, you don't understand much, and it's hard to kind of think in your head what's going on. Because I don't think I understood exactly what the consequences of cancer could have been. But I understood that my mom was sick, and just that she was having to go to see a lot of doctors, and was just having to rest a lot. But I don't think I fully understood. But at the same time, I was in an age where you're very curious. And so I wanted to learn all about cancer. I wanted to learn about breast cancer. I wanted to be involved I wanted to make her dinner and help with that, and lay with her in bed and help her rest, and stay home from school. And just like, I wanted to be her caregiver at 8 years old, because I was like, she needs that. Because I was just trying to like learn. And I can remember about 6 months after my mom was diagnosed, um, I kind of had been hearing that, like, this breast cancer can be passed down, and like knew that my grandma had it, and had heard other families where it had been passed down. And I was like, like, as an 8-year-old, I was thinking, okay, does that mean that like I have breast cancer? And so I can remember, like, literally at 8 years old, going up to my mom and being like, Mom, like, my breast kind of hurt. And her wanting to validate my feelings, of course, thought, be like, oh, that's nothing to worry about. She wanted to validate me. So she took me to the doctor. My doctor kind of understood what was going on. She told my doctor what was kind of happening. And so, again, trying to validate my feelings, we're like, okay, we'll do a little checkup. So they gave me a little checkup, and then they both kind of sat me down and were like, so, just because your mom had breast cancer doesn't mean that you have breast cancer or are going to. And it's just those little moments of like having to understand cancer and having to learn about it when you're still learning about the world. I think that was a huge impact, as well as just a bonding experience with my mom and I, just to want to be there for her while I knew my mom was sick. And something that I have taken along with me in my life, because as that has something that like was so powerful at the age of 8, something that wasn't just going to go away in a couple years. It's something that I have been passionate about ever since, because I find my story lucky, and I am lucky to still have my mom with me today. And so it's made me super passionate to be there for other families that are also going through this experience that I got to witness firsthand. And knowing that there are other children, there are other moms, there are sisters and aunts who are having to go through this, and friends and families. And I think it's really given me a passion. And like Pam was saying, I don't think I would be where I am today without my mom's diagnosis too. So similar in that way, it has really shaped my whole life. Just our ages very different, but at the same time, I think both of them have had a tremendous impact of where we are today, how the years after that have shaped us. And another question for you, Pam, that I wanted to ask was just kind of what helped you as a co-survivor to get through that experience and that journey, and how has your awareness to breast cancer and cancer overall, like, how has that changed?
You know, I look back at that time and, you always hear someone say, oh gosh, I could never do that. Or I could never have handled that. Well, you know what? You do what you got to do. If you can imagine, I had, I guess at the time my mother had her bone marrow transplant. She was in Atlanta at Emory. I had 2-year-old twin daughters, a full-time job, no family in Birmingham, and I was going back and forth to Atlanta to be with my mother. So when I left the girls, I had that guilt in my heart. When I wasn't there for my mother, even though I had a brother, it was a different connection. My brother is an awesome guy, but when my mother and I were together, it was she could relax more. I think it was just a deeper connection. And so when I was with my girls, I felt like I needed to be there with my mother. I obviously have a wonderful husband that puts up with me and has for 34 years. When we bought our home, my husband, everything that we looked at in anticipation that there might come a time when my mother needed to come live with us. And I will always love him for that. Living at the time in the community where we lived in Vestavia, one of the neighbors, I guess, found out what was going on, and they told their church. And I, out of the blue, got a call from a minister at one of the local churches who said, hey, how can we help? And I just remember thinking, I don't even go to your church. I don't teach Sunday school. I don't do this. Like, I'm not worthy of your help. And, this was 25 years ago. So there was not Forge. There was the American Cancer Society. They had bosom buddies. But it did not reach, so you were really dependent on the community. And at that time, they had people that took turns, because I was having to drive my mother to radiation every single day down to UAB for 6 weeks. And they organized people to do that. And, so if I hear of something, now we've got these great websites where people can sign up to bring meals. They can help drive. I became a part of a cancer care team myself, so that we could sit with the cancer patient, so that their caregivers could get their hair done, could go have lunch with a girlfriend, could take care of themselves, so that they in turn could be better mothers themselves and better wives and more present. And I made it through this with not crying. I'm really proud of myself. But, I say that if you can open your heart to learn what you can learn through that experience, even though my mother passed away, what a gift to be with her during that time. Now, did I yank a knot in a lot of doctors' tails? Oh, absolutely. I think that there were a good many of them that kind of wanted to turn around and duck into a doorway when they saw me coming. But I was a very strong advocate for my mother. If she needed pain medicine, I was going to make sure that she didn't wait. And again, I love nurses. A lot of y'all are nurses. They were so overworked. They couldn't get to all of the patients like they should have. I learned that it's okay to get on the internet. Be careful with that, because a lot of it can be kind of gloom and doom, but knowledge is power. And I encourage any caregiver, if you've got a doctor whose ego is too big to listen to your questions that you have, then you need to seek out an advocate within the hospital, because that's your right, and that's that patient's right. And I was blessed. Now they've got whole teams of doctors. Back then, you had one from column A, and you had your radiation oncologist, and you had so many different pieces that weren't all cohesive in meeting together. And how cool is it now that they do that? That everyone's kind of on the same page. So, I want to be the voice for that person who is maybe afraid to ask those questions, or, to educate themselves. My OBGYN actually put me, enabled me to get a high risk assessment, which I found out the other day was through Janet at Brookwood. And as a result of being assessed, I was triaged into better treatment. So I got a breast MRI every 6 months, and I got a mammogram, which was always followed very closely by an ultrasound because they would always invariably find something. So I was so blessed because I talked to everybody about my experience that my doctor was intent enough to say, hey, let's see if this will work for you. And so I was in the care of April Maddox, and once every 6 months for 4 years, I met with her. And eventually we came to the conclusion that, you know what, we need to see if we can get a prophylactic mastectomy approved. And, it's funny how things happen. I had actually lost my job, and I got the approval, which I never thought I would have gotten the approval for the mastectomy. But if I hadn't lost that job, I know I wouldn't have taken the time to do that and to care for myself. And, I was so blessed, even though I did go through the mastectomy, I didn't have a cancer diagnosis. And I try to tell all of my friends, in one breath, you and I are at higher risk because our mothers had breast cancer, but only 10% of breast cancer is hereditary. So my risk was because I'm a woman, and I'm 1 out of every 8. If I had been diagnosed with breast cancer, it would have had absolutely nothing to do with anything other than the fact that I would have been 1 out of those 8. So, you always hear someone go, well, I didn't have any family history. Wake up. Make sure, if you have a question, my 27-year-old daughter, one of her, is in a high-risk group right now because of fibroadenomas. And I have educated my girls to listen to their body and to ask and to pursue, but also not to have unnecessary biopsies, because they, just that goes on to a whole nother discussion. But, to ask the questions and to seek out the answers for themselves. And if they don't get that, then if that door closes, go find another one. So, it has, I try to advocate to anyone I can, to learn as much as I can.
I think that just touches on your experience overall. I know, like, for my experience, kind of how it shaped me, and I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's just something that I think as young as I was, just took along with me throughout my life. Like I said, I wouldn't be at Forge if I hadn't gone through that experience with my mom. I know you mentioned that you went on the walk in honor of your mom. Like, that's something that ever since I was 8, like, I did every single year with my mom, which kind of like sparked the beacons of hope for this week, tomorrow. Just because as a co-survivor, it was really important for me to be able to honor my mom and her journey, because my experience, I like got to see and learn how difficult that cancer journey can be, for both the co-survivor and especially for the survivor and the person going through that diagnosis, and just like how graceful men and women have to be that have breast cancer or any type of cancer, honestly. And just especially like a parent that has to go through cancer while also having to take care of their own children. And I know, Pam, you can probably understand this, like you being a co-survivor and like having to deal with that diagnosis from your mom while also like having newborn twins. That just like takes so much grace and strength that like I got to see at such a young age. And so I think for me, it's been something that has been so important to honor those people, and to make sure that they know that they have support and that they have a community as well. Because I mean, like, my community is what got me through. I didn't at that age understand the fear that came along with it. I think the fear came more as I got into my teenage years of like worrying about recurrence and um, getting to the age where I actually could process cancer and could hear the actual stories of people who had different stories from my mom. And so getting to that age, it was like, okay, my mom's at 3 years. Now let's try to get to 5. And then we'd get to 5 and I'd be like, okay, well, now let's get to 10. Because that was, I think, more of a fear that my mom didn't have for herself. But I think it was more of me wanting to make sure that she stayed healthy and she was able to stay where she was. Because that's something that I am gonna be going through. But again, like, community is what gets me through. Um, my second grade teacher, when my mom was diagnosed, ironically, her mom, my teacher's mother, also was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so my teacher and I would have a little journal that we would write back to each other. And whenever all the kids would leave to go home, she would write something to me in it. And then the next day at school, whenever we had like a free period or like a playtime, like, I would write back to her. And like, I still have the journal from literally when I was in second grade. And just having friends who, because at that age, like, I wanted to talk about, because I was, again, trying to learn and understand. So I would talk to my friends about it. And I would ask my mom a lot of questions. Um, just trying to understand. I can remember the first day my mom she shaved her head when she was going through chemo. And I can like vividly remember the day she came home with my aunt. They came back. My mom was wearing a bandana over her head. And I was like, what is that? And they're like, we have a surprise for you. And she took it off. And as an 8-year-old, again, not understanding why that had to happen, I just saw this like woman that was my mom who didn't have hair anymore. It was like she was a new person. And I can remember me just being like, where's my mom? And like me just like running to my room. And it took my mom having to come to talk to me and be like, just because I had to shave my hair, like, I'm still your mom. I'm still the same person. And it took that teaching and like little teaching moments and community of my friends and my teachers and my school, and family, just to like get me through that first year. And then once that was over with and we were in the point of me growing up and understanding about what had happened, it was more of me wanting to take my experience to help others who are now going through that experience. And I know that there are also kids today whose parents are also going through that. I know that we had last week talking about her children who, all different ages, all helped like handled her diagnosis differently. And I think that just shows how much age does have an impact on being a co-survivor. And I think what these like conversations each Wednesday have also taught me is age of a survivor and those going through breast cancer also makes an impact. With Sharon and Audra, just all of the different experiences at different ages, I think just this month have alone showed me how much our experiences are so individualized, which I think is why Forge is so great, because it's so individualized to the person. Because yes, we're all in this one big breast cancer community, which is amazing. And we can all have that to come together. But at the same time, it's really hopeful to know that this is our own journey and it's ours and it's different from someone else's, and that's okay. And that we have community that's going to support us in our journey, whether that's a co-survivor, whether that's a survivor or someone currently going through a diagnosis. And so I just think, kind of like you were saying, it's just kind of shaped me in a certain way. But another question that I had, kind of one last question that I wanted both me and you, Pam, to touch on was, what recommendation would you make to a co-survivor that is in the shoes that you were in? What would you tell them? Any tips or just advice about what would you do if you could go back in those shoes?
Oh, I might get emotional on this one. I think that if your loved one thinks that something is wrong, you scream and you scream loud until someone listens. When my mother had her recurrence, they did the CA 125 test. They did a lot of these things. And basically it was like, you know what? It is absolutely normal for you to be concerned about any little ache or pain or whatever. And my mom knew. And I wouldn't really call it a regret as much as something I learned, because I can't blame myself for that. But she knew, and by the time that she got someone to listen to her, it had spread to the lymph nodes in her neck. So, you know, I think we want to fix things. You probably, as an 8-year-old, wanted to fix things and make it better. I wanted to reassure my mother, Mom, everything's okay. The doctor said everything's okay. But, you know, get a second opinion, ask for another test, listen to the loved one that you're working with. So many things during the journey with my mother. We were told she will never do this again. And my mother actually survived a fire when she was in Atlanta. I'm from South Florida. And so my mother, with me being 9 months pregnant when she was diagnosed, moved to Atlanta, uprooting her entire life, all of her friends, to be near my brother so that she could get her treatment and then go back home. And during that process, my mother was living in an apartment and somebody had too many things plugged into an electrical outlet. And my mother's apartment burnt to the ground. Now, God had his hand in this because my mother was the type that she put her makeup on and she got herself dressed and you would have never known there was anything wrong with her. And for some reason, and I have an inkling, I know why that was, she got dressed and went to the mall to people watch. She normally would have been on that sofa asleep with narcotics because she was going through treatment, and a bomb could have blown up and she would not have woken up. But that day, my mom was not there. And when I came over there to Atlanta to help salvage whatever we could, I remember us giggling that, you know, her TV was melted into a blob, yet we found a lot of candles that weren't even melted, matches that didn't even ignite. And it was like, we were spared. We had a piece of her china. And I remember my mother saying, you know, the Waterford crystal, it was going to be yours and now it's gone. And I'm like, you know, Mama, you raised me to get a college degree. If I want to buy that, I can buy that. You know, the most important thing was salvage from that fire. And that was you. When she went through her recurrences, at one point because it had spread to the lymph nodes in her neck, she had to have an emergency tracheotomy. I was told that she would never talk again. Well, any of y'all that have been around me know what a talker I am, and I got that honestly from my mother. And she absolutely talked again. She got mets to the brain, and for a short time, she lost her vision. We were told that she'd never see again. She did see again. So, you know, I look at all the gifts that I was given along that journey, even though, you know, my hope is that in my daughter's lifetime, they're going to, heaven forbid they're diagnosed, they will live with cancer. They won't die of cancer. And it is so wonderful. Back 25 years ago when my mother was diagnosed, you didn't see a pink ribbon. You didn't. People didn't know about breast cancer. And I remember my mother getting exasperated because this was you would see red ribbons everywhere. And it's not say taking anything away from the AIDS epidemic and the awareness at that time, but that was what the awareness was. There was no awareness for breast cancer. And I think she would be so tickled to see where we've come, and the education and the support and the awareness that just in that short amount of time, you know, keep a notebook. You know, my mother kept a notebook, especially when she had the trach and she wasn't able to talk for a while. But as that caregiver or the person in those appointments, you know, take notes of everything. Find out the names of everyone and the phone numbers of everyone that's on that care team. Find that advocate within the hospital who was that Marion, who were other wonderful people along the way, even that many years ago, that were there to help support my mother and me and let me know that it was okay if I was getting frustrated or if I had questions or complaints, that they were on my team with my mother, not on UAB's team or Emory's team or anyone else. They were on our team. And, you know, utilize, I mean, Forge, again, from what you were talking about, when my mother recurred, she was a part of a group called Bosom Buddies. And when she became metastatic, they didn't want her anymore. And I remember how hurt she was, because again, we were just learning, and I understood and respected the newly diagnosed women. It was hard for them to hear about someone who was cured and then had a recurrence. And so, you know, the fact that you guys, for Sharon and for other women, you know, have a place to go where they can have positivity and light and have their group of support. There wasn't that back then for my mom, you know? So the fact that we touch everyone that is affected, no matter where the hospital is, no matter who the doctor is, that's just amazing. And I'm just really proud to be a part of this group.
Yes, thank you. That was, yeah, I can agree with everything you just said. And I think having to talk to any co-survivors, like you were saying, who are going to be put in the same situation, like you were saying, we want to help, like we all want to advocate. And I think if I was to give like a recommendation to someone who is in my shoes, it's hard to recommend something to an 8-year-old, but I just am trying to remember, and from when I was that old, like what would have helped me. And I think just to remind someone of that age, that little 8-year-old or however old the child is, that she's strong, that her mother is strong, or whoever is going through that cancer diagnosis, that they are strong, and that it's okay for her to talk about it and to ask questions and to be curious, and to try to be involved. Like that's okay for them to want to do, because they're learning, and it's okay to learn about it, and they shouldn't be afraid to learn more, and be there in that journey, because it's also their journey. But I also think, going on top of that, like recommendations for a mother who has breast cancer or any type of cancer and is having to talk to their daughter or child, because I, again, was very curious at that age, and I'm really thankful that my mom was very inclusive in making this a journey that we took together. She made sure that she was answering my questions. She was affirming me when I had my own wonders about whether I had breast cancer at that age. She never made me feel like I shouldn't be involved. And I think that was really important for me to get through that, was to be involved, because it wasn't something that I had to be scared of. She made it something that was okay to talk about, that was normal to talk about, because it's normal. And I didn't have to be afraid. I could find power in being a co-survivor, and she could find power in her diagnosis. And that was something that was really great for me, and that I was able to take from that experience to where I am now today, is to be able to find your power in your own diagnosis and find your power as a co-survivor, and shaping your life and your community and finding people around you. I think that children at each age have different ways of understanding and different ways that they need to be walked through this. And so just for any mom that is going through this, that has a daughter, just to be able to find the best ways that are fit for that age. And remember that they are also very strong to be able to do this with children. That is a very graceful process that I can't imagine having to do, but it's so possible, with a lot of grit and determination and strength. And so, yeah, I think I just want to thank everyone for coming and listening to me and Pam's stories as co-survivors, and being able to just hear what we have gone through, and to just share our experiences with that. I just want to thank everyone.
And here's my mom, everyone. So she, I have this picture out, and I'm like, okay, I want everyone to see my mom. One more thing that I did mention, I'll say briefly, talking about niches and support. If there is someone that is BRCA positive, or they, for whatever reason, are facing and have made a decision to have a prophylactic mastectomy, that is also a hole. I didn't feel comfortable asking my girlfriends that had had mastectomies, that had cancer, questions. It was almost like, you know what, you don't have a cancer diagnosis. They're facing a cancer diagnosis and having to have drains and expanders and infections and everything else. And I think that if there is someone that Forge runs into, or anyone that you know, is really important, because it's a loss too, even though, I asked them to give me better ones than I had before, but, jury's out on that. But, I didn't feel like there was somebody for me to talk to comfortably about what I was going through making that decision. I have not regretted it, not one day. But, I was very sensitive to not wanting to burden someone who, if I were them, I'd be thinking, well, I don't feel sorry for you. You don't have cancer. You're lucky. You get to get ahead of it. And I am blessed that I did. So, for what that's worth, if there is anyone out there, try to find someone. My number is available, and I would love to talk to you about it if you need it.